The sea keeps secrets. Sometimes it whispers them back on the tide. Most times it doesn't. This is a story about three men who walked into silence and never came back. December 1900. Off the coast of Scotland, where the Atlantic stretches out forever, there's a cluster of islands most people have never heard of. The Flannan Isles. 7 rocks jutting from the water, bare, windswept, forgotten. For centuries, sailors avoided them when they could. Too many ships had gone down there. Too many lives lost in the dark. Some said the islands were cursed, that bad things happened there, that even the seabirds acted strange. But by the end of the 1800s, the shipwrecks were piling up. Something had to be done. They decided to build a lighthouse. 3 years of construction on solid rock. It took 3 years, 75 feet tall, standing on the largest island, Eilean Mòr, perched more than 100 feet above the ocean on solid rock. When the lamp was finally lit in December 1899, everyone said it was a success. A light in one of the darkest, most dangerous places on Earth. 3 keepers would man it, always 3. They'd work in rotation, 2 weeks on the island, 1 week back home with their families. It was hard work, but it was steady, predictable, routine, until it wasn't. The 3 men stationed there in December 1900 were not beginners. James Ducat was the head keeper, 43 years old. He'd been working in lighthouses for over 20 years. Married, experienced, reliable. The kind of man you trust with your life in a storm. Thomas Marshall was the second keeper, 28 years old. Also married. Calm. Capable. 6 years of lighthouse service under his belt. Donald McArthur was the occasional keeper. He was filling in for the regular third man who was on shore leave. McArthur was quieter than the others, kept to himself more, but he knew the work. For the first few weeks, everything ran like clockwork. Ships passed safely at night. The light shone exactly as it should. Sailors saw the beam cutting through the fog and knew where they were. The keepers kept their logs, tended the machinery, watched the horizon. Everything was normal, and then, on December 15th, something changed. The steamer Archer was passing through the channel that night. The captain was an experienced man. He knew these waters. He knew where the lighthouse should be. But when he looked out into the darkness, he saw nothing. No beam, no light. Just empty black water and fog. He checked his position, looked again. Still nothing. The lighthouse was out. He made a note in his ship's log and kept moving. The seas were getting rough. The wind was picking up. There was nothing he could do. But something about that darkness stayed with him. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Another passing vessel reported the same thing. The light was gone, but with winter storms hammering the coast, no one could get to the island to check. The relief vessel was scheduled to arrive on December 20th, then the 21st. But the weather kept pushing it back. 9 days passed. 9 days of darkness. Finally, on December 26th, Boxing Day, the weather broke enough for the relief ship to make the journey. The Hesperus arrived at Eilean Mòr just after dawn. Captain Jim Harvey brought the ship as close to the landing as he dared. The seas were still rough. Waves crashed against the rocks below. He expected to see the keepers waiting. That's how it always went. The men would be at the landing, ready to help unload supplies, ready to greet the new keeper coming to replace one of them. But the landing was empty. Captain Harvey sounded the ship's horn. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed off the cliffs. No one appeared. No figures came down the path. No flag was raised. Nothing. The captain looked through his telescope. The lighthouse stood there, silent. Even though it was barely past dawn, the lamp should have still been burning. But it was dark. Something was wrong. He called for Joseph Mòr, the relief keeper who was supposed to start his shift. Mòr would go ashore and find out what was happening. Mòr climbed into a small boat with 2 sailors. They rowed through the choppy water to the landing. Mòr stepped onto the wet stone, the wind pulling at his coat. The sailors said they'd wait. He started up the steep path toward the lighthouse. The wind was fierce. Gulls screamed overhead. But there was no human sound, no voices calling out, no footsteps. He reached the compound gate. It was closed, but not locked. He pushed it open and walked through. The main door to the lighthouse stood slightly ajar. Mòr stopped. Something felt off. He called out, "Ducat! Marshal! McArthur!" His voice was swallowed by the wind. No answer. He pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The silence hit him immediately. Not just quiet, silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Mòr moved through the entrance hall. Everything looked normal, clean, organized, but empty. He went to the kitchen. On the table sat the remains of a meal. The food was cold, untouched, like someone had set it out and then just walked away. One chair was knocked over, lying on its side. Mòr felt his chest tighten. He checked the sleeping quarters. All 3 beds were made, neatly, carefully. The blankets pulled tight. He went back to the entrance hall and looked at the coat hooks by the door. This was where the keepers hung their oilskin jackets. The heavy, waterproof coats every lighthouse keeper wore when they went outside in bad weather. 2 of the hooks were empty, but the 3rd coat hung there, dry, unused. Mòr stared at it. No keeper went outside in December without their oilskin. Not if they had a choice. The wind and spray would soak through regular clothes in minutes. So why would 2 men take their coats and one leave his behind? Unless something had happened fast, too fast to think. Mòr climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room. His footsteps echoed in the narrow space. At the top, he found the lamp itself. The glass panels were clean. The machinery was in working order. The fuel tank was full. Everything was ready. All someone had to do was light it. But no one had. Mòr stood there for a moment, looking out at the grey ocean. Then he went back down. He needed to check the logbook. The logbook sat on a desk in the main room. Every lighthouse keeper was required to keep detailed records. Weather conditions, wind speed, visibility, any maintenance work done, any problems. Mòr opened it to the last page. The entries stopped on December 15th. He read through them carefully. December 12th, normal entries, wind increasing, rain. December 13th, storm continuing, heavy seas, all secure. December 14th, storm still severe, some damage at West Landing. Marshal and Ducat went to inspect, returned safely. Then December 15th, the final day. The entries were different. Marshal had written them. His handwriting looked rushed, less careful than usual. Storm still raging. Wind beyond anything I've seen. Damage at the landing is worse. Ducat went to check again. McArthur very quiet. Won't speak. Won't eat. And then, later that same day, noon, Ducat returned. Won't say what he saw. Storm finally stopping. Seas calming. All of us praying. And finally, evening. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all. That was it. The last words written in that lighthouse. Mòr read them again. Something about them felt wrong. The tone, the mention of praying. These were experienced men. They'd seen storms before. What had scared them? Mòr went back outside. He shouted their names again. Ducat! Marshall! McArthur! The wind carried his voice away. He searched the rest of the compound. The storage buildings. The paths. Every corner of the small station. Nothing. 3 men had vanished. He went back down to the landing and signaled Hesperus. Captain Harvey needed to know. 3 men had vanished. Within hours, a full search party arrived. They spread out across Eilean Mòr. The island wasn't large, maybe 40 acres of rock and grass. If the men were there, they'd find them. But they didn't. What they did find was strange. At the West Landing, the one mentioned in the logbook, there was damage. Serious damage. The West Landing sat more than 100 feet above the water. It was carved into the cliff face, with iron railings and concrete moorings to tie down supplies. When the search party got there, they stopped. The scene didn't make sense. A wooden supply box, weighing more than 100 pounds, had been ripped from its concrete moorings. Not just moved, torn free. The bolts were sheared off. The box itself had been thrown up the cliff face. Up, not down into the water, but up, over the rocks. The iron railings were bent toward the sea, twisted like they were made of wire. Ropes as thick as a man's wrist had been shredded. Stone steps were displaced. Chunks of rock torn out of the cliff. Whatever had done this had been powerful, more powerful than any normal wave. But here's what didn't make sense. The last entry in the logbook said the storm had ended, that the sea was calm. And when they checked with other lighthouse stations along the coast, none of them reported severe weather on December 15th. The big storm had passed on the 12th. After that, conditions were rough, but not unusual. Nothing that would cause this kind of damage. So what had Marshall seen? What had he written about? The investigation that followed tried to answer that question. The Northern Lighthouse Board sent officials to the island. They interviewed the search party, read the logbook, examined the damage. Their conclusion was straightforward. All 3 men had been swept away by a rogue wave. They believed Ducat and Marshall had gone down to the West Landing to secure equipment. Maybe a rope had come loose. Maybe something needed to be checked after the earlier storm. While they were there, a massive wave hit, bigger than anything they expected. A freak surge that came out of nowhere. McArthur must have seen it from the lighthouse. He ran down to help them. Moved so fast he forgot his coat. The wave took all 3. One moment they were there. The next, gone. An accident. Tragic, but explainable. The case was officially closed. The board sent new keepers to man the lighthouse. Life went on, but not everyone believed the official story. Fishermen who worked those waters had questions. They knew the sea. They'd been out there on December 14th and 15th. They said the weather was rough, yes, but not unusual. Not storm conditions. Nothing that would produce a wave big enough to reach that high. And that last logbook entry, sea calm, contradicted everything the board claimed. If the sea was calm, why would the men go to the landing at all? Then there were the smaller details. The things that didn't quite fit. The uneaten meal, the overturned chair, the beds made so carefully, the kitchen spotless. If there had been an emergency, if they'd rushed outside in a panic, would they have left everything so neat? And why would all 3 men go to the landing together? Standard procedure was for at least one keeper to stay at the lighthouse. Always. No matter what, the light could never be left unmanned. But it had been. Stories began to spread through the coastal towns. Some people said the men had gone mad, that isolation had broken them, that something dark had happened between them in those long December nights. Others claimed they'd seen something in the water, something that came up from the deep. The next group of keepers sent to Eilean Mòr reported strange experiences. One said he heard footsteps on the stairs at night. When he checked, no one was there. Another claimed he heard voices, not words exactly, just sounds that almost formed words, coming from empty rooms. Several keepers reported a feeling they couldn't shake, like they were being watched, like someone was there, just out of sight. One keeper lasted a single night. When the relief ship came, he refused to stay. He packed his things and left. He wouldn't talk about what happened, just said he couldn't go back. The stories grew over the years. Some said it was spies, foreign agents who'd captured or killed the keepers. Others claimed smugglers had come to the island, that the keepers had seen something they shouldn't have. A few believed in something supernatural, the old curse, something that had been there long before the lighthouse was built. But theories don't bring people back, and they don't fill the silence. More than a century has passed now. The lighthouse still stands on Eilean Mòr. It's automated. No keepers needed anymore. Just machinery and light, turning through the night. The island remains the same. Bare rock, wind and salt spray. The only sounds are seabirds and waves. Sometimes researchers go there, historians, people trying to solve the mystery. They walk the paths the keepers walked, stand where Joseph Moore stood, look out at the same grey ocean, but the island gives nothing back. 3 men woke up on the morning of December 15th, 1900. They ate breakfast. They tended the machinery. They wrote in the logbook. And then something happened. Something we will never fully understand. Maybe it was the sea. A rogue wave so massive, so perfectly timed, that it erased 3 lives in seconds. Maybe it was something between them. Tension that built until it broke. Maybe it was something else. Something the ocean carried in and took back out. Something we don't have words for. We want answers because we need the world to make sense. We need to believe that everything has an explanation, a reason, a clear before and after. But some doors close without explanation. Some questions don't have answers. And 3 lighthouse keepers walked into a December day and became part of the mystery instead of the men who kept the light. The beam still turns, the lamp still burns through the darkness, and somewhere in the silence between the waves, their story waits. Not for an answer, just to be remembered. The sea keeps its secrets, and this one, it's never letting go.